Section 1, the lake, and the legend. The first thing you should know about me is that I'm not the kind of guy who likes drama. I like quiet mornings, good coffee, and the sound of a fishing line slipping into calm water. My name's Michael Turner, and I live on the edge of a small rural community called Cedar Creek Estates, a place that looks like it was carved out of a postcard. The lake behind my house isn't just any lake, it's Turner Lake, named after my family. My grandfather built this property before the HOA even existed. That lake was his pride, my father's peace, and now mine. When I bought the property for my dad's estate 10 years ago, I promised myself I'd keep it just as it always was, clean, quiet, and private. The deed was crystal clear. Turner Lake was private property, not community land, not HOA jurisdiction. It was written in black ink, signed, sealed, and notarized. But as anyone who's lived near a homeowners association knows, common sense doesn't stand a chance when there's a Karen on the board. The first time I met Karen Simmons, the self-appointed HOA queen, she was already scowling at me like I'd parked a monster truck on her flower beds. It was a humid July afternoon, and I was cleaning my fishing boat at the dock when I heard her heels crunch across the gravel. She carried that infamous clipboard like it was a badge of honor. "Excuse me," she called out, already offended by something. "Are you aware that residents aren't allowed to use motorized boats on the community lake?" I turned, squinting against the sun. "Community lake?" I asked, genuinely confused. She pointed at the water like she was Moses about to part the Red Sea. "Yes, that lake right there. The HOA bylaws clearly state that only non-motorized craft are permitted. No gas engines, no noise pollution." I stared at her for a moment, then chuckled softly. "Ma'am, this isn't the community lake. This is my lake. Turner Lake. Private property." Her expression twisted. "Private? No, no, no. The lake's right there, connected to our subdivision. It's in our boundary map." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over, pulling the deed from the glove box of my truck. I'd kept it there ever since the HOA first formed, just in case. "You see that line?" I said, showing her the boundary description. "That's the property border. Everything past that oak tree, including the dock, the boat, and the lake, is Turner property. Always has been." Karen's eyes flicked across the page, but she didn't seem to process a single word. She just puffed herself up, the way people do when they realize they're wrong but can't handle it. "We'll see about that," she said, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, Karen made it her personal mission to remind me that she was the self-proclaimed sheriff of Cedar Creek. I caught her pacing along the fence line, snapping photos of my dock, and once even sticking little orange flags in the ground as if she were mapping out a new HOA conquest. Every time I mowed the grass, she'd show up with a friendly notice about aesthetic uniformity. I ignored her. I'd dealt with her type before, control freaks who mistook obsession for order. But that only seemed to make her more determined. Then came the day that started it all. It was early morning, one of those perfect dawns where the fog still hugs the water and the world feels soft. I poured my coffee, grabbed my fishing pole, and walked down to the dock. Buddy, my golden retriever, trotted beside me, tail wagging. We'd been doing this for years, me casting, him lying at my feet, both of us soaking in the silence. About an hour in, I heard it. That high-pitched, nasally voice that could strip paint off wood. "Excuse me." "Karen." I sighed and reeled in slowly, turning to see her standing at the edge of the property in full morning glory, sunglasses, visor, floral blouse, clipboard, and a bright red face that suggested she'd already been yelling at someone before breakfast. "You again," I said, trying to keep my tone polite. "It's a little early for HOA patrol, isn't it?" She jabbed a manicured finger toward the water. "You are trespassing on HOA property." I blinked. "Karen, I'm on my own dock, on my own land, fishing in my own lake. This lake belongs to the community," she snapped. "We've reviewed our maps, and your claim of ownership is invalid. You cannot just claim a natural body of water." I set my rod down. "First of all, the lake was man-made. My grandfather built it. Second, I have legal documentation. Third, I took a breath, trying not to laugh. You're standing on my land while accusing me of trespassing. Karen's face flushed an even deeper red. Don't you get smart with me. If you refuse to leave, I'll call the police. You're violating HOA bylaws and creating a disturbance. Fishing is now a disturbance. I asked, incredulous. You're refusing a lawful order, she barked. I looked around. The only witnesses were a pair of ducks and Buddy, who tilted his head like even he couldn't believe this woman. Karen, I said, calm but firm, you're trespassing. Step off my property, go home, and leave me alone. That must have been the final straw for her, because she pulled out her phone like it was a weapon and jabbed at the screen. Hello, yes, 911, she said dramatically. I'd like to report an armed man trespassing near the lake. Yes, with a weapon. He's threatening me. I froze. My stomach dropped. What the hell are you doing? I shouted. That's a fishing pole. Karen ignored me, turning slightly away, as if to give her performance more gravitas. Yes, I feel unsafe. He's refusing to leave and has a dangerous object, looks like some sort of rifle. My jaw hit the floor. It's a fishing rod, you lunatic. Buddy barked, maybe sensing the tension, and Karen gasped theatrically. He has a dog, too. An aggressive one. That was it. I was done. Fine, I said, reeling in my line and placing it neatly beside me. Call whoever you want. I'll be right here. On my property. Waiting. She huffed, spun on her heel, and marched away, phone still pressed to her ear, muttering about lawless residents and board violations. For a moment, I thought she might be bluffing. Surely, even Karen wouldn't waste police time on something so ridiculous. But 20 minutes later, I saw the flashing lights at the top of my driveway. Two sheriff's deputies stepped out of their cruiser, hands resting near their holsters, not drawn, but cautious. Karen was right behind them, practically glowing with smug satisfaction. There, she said, pointing dramatically at me. That's him. I raised my hands halfway in disbelief. Officers, I began. I'm the property owner here. My name's Michael Turner. I'm fishing on my own lake. The younger deputy glanced at my rod, then at Karen. Ma'am, is this the weapon you mentioned? Karen folded her arms. It looked like a rifle from where I was standing. It's a fishing pole, he said flatly. I didn't know that, she snapped. You can't be too careful these days. The older deputy turned to me. Mr. Turner, you have proof of ownership for the property? Absolutely, I said, pulling the deed from my pocket, because by this point I'd started carrying it just for moments like this. He scanned it, quickly nodded, and handed it back. Looks clear to me. You're within your rights. Karen's mouth fell open. What? No. He's breaking community regulations. Ma'am, the deputy said patiently, this property isn't under your HOA's jurisdiction. The lake is privately owned by Mr. Turner. Karen's face twisted into something between fury and disbelief. That can't be right. It touches the HOA property line. It's part of our landscape. The younger deputy sighed. Touching a property line doesn't make it yours, ma'am. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Buddy wagged his tail, sensing my amusement. The officers gave Karen a brief lecture about misuse of emergency services, then politely suggested she return her home before she got cited for trespassing. She stomped off in a huff, muttering something about legal reviews and lawyers. When they left, I sat back down, cast my line, and let the tension drain out of me. The water rippled softly under the morning sun. Buddy curled up beside me again. People, I said, quietly shaking my head, they really don't make sense sometimes. He barked once, as if to agree, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat, and something told me she was just getting started. Section 2, the confrontation and the call fallout the morning after the 911 incident, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, texts, and even a few voicemails, all from neighbors. Cedar Creek Estates was buzzing like a hornet's nest, and I didn't even have to guess who stirred it up. Karen. Apparently, she'd gone door to door that evening, spinning some wild story about how she'd saved the neighborhood from a dangerous trespasser. According to one text I got from my neighbor Jim, she was telling people I brandished a weapon and refused to comply with officers. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so dangerous. I'd seen what happens when false reports like that escalate. But what Karen didn't realize was that her little performance had backfired in more ways than one. Around 10 a.m., a sheriff's SUV pulled up to my driveway again. Same two deputies as before, only this time they weren't cautious. They were annoyed. "Morning, Mr. Turner," said the older deputy, stepping out. "Sorry to bother you again. Mind if we talk for a minute?" "Not at all," I said, setting down my coffee. "What's going on?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "We've had a few follow-up calls from the HOA president. Mrs. Simmons. Seems she's not satisfied with our report." "Of course she's not," I muttered. "She's allergic to being wrong." The deputy smirked. "You're not far off. Thing is, she filed a formal complaint accusing us of neglecting our duties and enabling illegal property use. So, we had to review the dashcam footage, our notes, the 911 call, everything, and I asked, though I could already see where this was going, and he said, pulling a small folder from under his arm, "We found something interesting. You might want to hear it for yourself." He handed me a printed transcript of the 911 call. The first lines made me snort. "Dispatcher, 911, what's your emergency? Karen, there's a man at the lake with a rifle. He's threatening me and my property." Dispatcher, "Ma'am, is he pointing the weapon at you?" Karen, "He's waving it around and shouting. It's big and metal." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "You shouted at her?" "I told her to get off my land." I said, "That's about it." He nodded. "We figured. Anyway, the DA's office isn't happy about this. False report of a firearm is a serious matter." My eyebrows shot up. "They're pressing charges?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say she's about to get a visit." I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, and exhaled slowly. "Well, it's about time." Buddy barked from the porch, as if echoing my satisfaction. That afternoon, I saw it happen. Karen was in her driveway, pruning her rose bushes. Because even when she was scheming, she had to look busy. When a patrol car rolled up, the same deputies stepped out. From my porch, I could hear snippets of the conversation. "Mrs. Simmons, we need to discuss your recent 911 call." She froze mid-snip. "What about it?" "Ma'am, filing a false emergency report is a misdemeanor offense, especially when it involves claiming someone had a firearm." "I didn't lie," she said, defensive. "It looked like a gun. He was threatening." "Ma'am, we reviewed our footage. Mr. Turner was calm, unarmed, and cooperative. You were on his property, not the other way around." Her jaw dropped. "That's absurd. He doesn't own that lake." One of the deputies pointed to a folder in his hand. "He does. We confirmed with county records this morning. His family's owned that parcel since 1963. Karen's voice grew shrill. "That can't be. The HOA map says," "Ma'am, HOA maps aren't legal property documents." Her face went from red to white, then back to red again. "Are you seriously telling me that man can just do whatever he wants? Within the law?" "Yes, ma'am." They handed her a citation and warned her that another false report could land her in court. She looked ready to explode. When they left, she spun toward my house and glared like she could burn holes through the siding. I raised my coffee cup in a little salute. Buddy wagged his tail beside me. That probably didn't help. A few days later, I found out just how far Karen was willing to go. The HOA board, most of whom were either afraid of her or too polite to argue, decided to review property boundaries around Turner Lake. I got a notice taped to my mailbox stating that due to ongoing confusion regarding jurisdiction, the HOA would be conducting a survey to determine shared access points. Translation: they were trying to find a loophole to claim part of my lake. I almost laughed. Almost. Then I saw the fine print, something about temporary access for inspection teams and possible property adjustments pending community approval. That was it. They wanted to rewrite the map. I called my attorney, a local guy named Ben Whitaker, who'd helped me sort through my father's estate years back. He was quiet for a moment, after I explained. Then he said dryly, "Mike, this woman's insane. You know that, right?" "Oh, I know," I said. "Question is, what do we do about it?" Ben chuckled. "We remind her that private property law isn't a democracy. Send me copies of your deed, the county survey, and any correspondence. I'll handle it." Within 48 hours, Ben sent a certified letter to the HOA's lawyer, complete with copies of land plats, water rights documentation, and a few legal phrases sharp enough to make even Karen sweat. He CC'd the county recorder's office, the sheriff, and the state's Department of Environmental Resources for good measure. When Karen received it, she was outside watering her front lawn. I watched from my porch as she tore open the envelope, scanned the first page, and froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the second page. Then, with a frustrated cry, she threw the papers into her recycling bin. Buddy barked once, amused. "Yeah, boy," I said, scratching his ear. "That's the sound of defeat hitting the trash." But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She never was. The next week, she started spreading a new rumor that I was endangering the neighborhood ecosystem by overfishing and polluting the lake. She even printed flyers and stuffed them into mailboxes. When I found one, I nearly choked laughing. It had a grainy, zoomed-in photo of me on my dock, captioned, "Unregulated fishing threatens Cedar Creek's wildlife. Report violations to the HOA immediately." The irony was almost too much. That evening, I invited a few neighbors over: Jim from down the road, the Millers, even Mrs. Sanchez, who'd once been one of Karen's biggest supporters. I laid out my property maps, ownership documents, and the letter from my lawyer on the picnic table. By the end of the night, they were shaking their heads in disbelief. "She really called 911 on you?" Mrs. Sanchez said, eyes wide. "Yep. And now she's saying you're polluting your own lake?" Jim asked, snorting. "Apparently so." Mrs. Sanchez sighed. "I used to think she was helping this neighborhood, but she's lost it." That's when something shifted. People started talking, not about me, but about her. All the old grudges resurfaced: the arbitrary fines, the lawn citations, the constant harassment. One by one, the board members who'd stood by her began distancing themselves. By Friday, an anonymous tip made its way to the local paper. Saturday morning, the headline hit: HOA president faces backlash after false 911 call and harassment claims. And just like that, Karen's kingdom started to crumble. But I knew she wasn't going down quietly. If there's one thing I'd learned about Karen Simmons, it was that she'd rather torch the whole neighborhood than admit she'd lost control. And as I watched the sun set over Turner Lake that evening, my reflection rippling in the water, I knew the real storm was still coming. Section 3, the exposure. HOA lies, Karen's meltdown, and the neighborhood awakening the morning after the newspaper headline dropped. The entire Cedar Creek neighborhood was in uproar. For the first time since I'd moved there, Karen wasn't strutting around like she owned the place. Instead, she was hiding behind closed curtains. Her shiny white Lexus, normally parked proudly in her driveway, was gone. Probably hiding it too. I poured my coffee and sat on my porch, letting the sunrise glimmer across Turner Lake. Buddy trotted beside me, tail wagging. The air felt lighter, peaceful. But deep down, I knew it was the calm before the storm. By 9 a.m., I was proven right. A black SUV pulled up, a county vehicle. Out stepped Martha Delgado, an investigator from the State Homeowners Association Oversight Committee. I'd spoken with her on the phone the night before, after she'd read the article and reached out. She wasn't a woman to mess with. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharp eyes. "Mr. Turner," she said, flashing a badge, "mind if I have a few minutes of your time?" "Of course," I said, gesturing toward the porch chairs. "Coffee?" She smiled faintly. "Tempting, but let's stay professional for now." Martha opened a folder, revealing printouts of emails, flyers, and HOA correspondence. I've been reviewing a pattern of complaints against Mrs. Simmons' HOA leadership going back 5 years. You wouldn't believe how many residents have contacted us about intimidation, fabricated fines, and misappropriation of funds. I raised an eyebrow. "Misappropriation?" She nodded. Money from dues that was meant for road maintenance somehow ended up as administrative bonuses. I let out a low whistle. Let me guess, Karen signed the checks? Bingo, Martha said. And now, with this false 911 call and harassment of a non-member, the state's looking closely. You may have just provided the final push. I leaned back, grinning. Well, I'm happy to help clean house. Not yet, she said, holding up a finger. I'll need your cooperation. We're organizing a community hearing. You'll testify, along with a few others who've come forward. It's time the board hears what's really going on. I nodded. Count me in. The next week, the community center was packed. People I'd barely spoken to before showed up, dozens of residents, many with thick folders, photos, and documents. Karen stood near the front, trying to maintain her usual composure, but her face was pale. Even her signature pearls looked out of place, trembling slightly around her neck. At the front table sat Martha, 2 county representatives, and a legal officer from the oversight board. Good evening, Martha began. We're here to address ongoing misconduct claims against the Cedar Creek Estates HOA and its current president, Mrs. Karen Simmons. The murmuring in the crowd was electric. Karen tried to smile. Before we begin, I'd just like to say these accusations are completely fabricated by one disgruntled, save it for your turn, Martha interrupted sharply. Karen's jaw clenched. She sat down, gripping her paperwork like it might shield her. I was called to speak third. Standing before the group, I laid out everything calmly, clearly, and with evidence. The 911 call transcript, the property deeds proving the lake was mine, the flyers accusing me of environmental threats, the threatening letters from the HOA trying to claim my shoreline. By the time I finished, the crowd was dead silent. Then someone from the back muttered, "Unbelievable." Another said, "She did the same thing to me last year." Martha turned to the audience. Anyone else wish to share experiences relevant to these allegations? Hands went up. Dozens of them. A retired couple spoke about being fined for having too many flowers in their garden. A single mother described being harassed for parking in her own driveway. Even the Millers, longtime friends of Karen, admitted that she'd used intimidation tactics to silence board dissent. Each story painted the same picture. Karen wasn't maintaining the community. She was controlling it. When it was finally Karen's turn to respond, her confidence cracked. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You're all twisting things. Everything I did was for the good of the neighborhood. By calling 911 on your own resident for fishing?" Martha asked, arching a brow. Karen faltered. "He was suspicious. He had a stick." The room erupted in laughter. "It was a fishing rod," I said calmly. "And you trespassed on my property. I didn't know it was yours." "Yes, you did," I replied, sliding the photo from her own HOA newsletter showing my dock labeled Turner Lake access. Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "You're all ungrateful. If it weren't for me, this place would fall apart." Martha folded her papers. "Mrs. Simmons, based on the testimonies and documentation provided, will be recommending immediate suspension of your authority pending investigation. A temporary management team will oversee the HOA until elections can be held." "You can't do that." Karen cried, standing up. "This is my neighborhood." "No, ma'am," Martha said coolly. "It's theirs." For the first time, Karen looked around and realized no one was on her side. Not one hand lifted for support, not one friendly nod. The empire she'd ruled for years had vanished in a single evening. Her hands trembled as she gathered her papers, face flushed with rage and humiliation. She muttered something under her breath and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Jim spoke up. "So, anyone want to celebrate at the lake?" Laughter filled the room. The following days were glorious. The oppressive weight of Karen's HOA rule lifted from Cedar Creek like fog after rain. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other for years started visiting again. Kids played by the lake, people waved from their porches, and the constant stream of petty citations stopped cold. Martha's team uncovered even more corruption, fake maintenance charges, inflated invoices, and unrecorded donations. The case was referred to the county prosecutor for financial review. And Karen? She disappeared. Her house sat dark for days. Rumor had it she'd gone to stay with her sister in another state while the investigation unfolded. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood at the edge of my dock with Buddy at my side. The lake was calm, reflecting the fading sky. Peaceful, finally. Then I noticed movement by the far road. Karen's Lexus creeping toward the exit gate, a moving trailer hitched behind it. She paused for a moment, maybe to glance at the lake she tried to claim. Then she drove off, tires crunching gravel. Buddy barked once, low and satisfied. "Yeah," I said softly. "Good riddance." That night, my neighbors threw a cookout by the lake. Music played, kids splashed near the shore, and laughter echoed across the water. I raised a toast with Jim and the others. To freedom, Jim said. To peace, Mrs. Sanchez added. I grinned. To finally fishing without a police escort. Everyone laughed. The lake shimmered under the stars, quiet except for the ripples of water and distant laughter. Turner Lake was home again, ours, not hers. And though I knew Karen would probably resurface somewhere else with another HOA to terrorize, at least here, her reign was over. For good. Section 4. The Final Revenge. Karen's last stand and the ultimate payback. For a few weeks after Karen left, Cedar Creek felt like paradise. No sudden inspections, no letters taped to mailboxes, no HOA spies photographing driveways. The new interim board, made up of actual reasonable neighbors, focused on repairs and community events instead of power plays. I started to believe it was finally over. But Karen was the kind of person who couldn't let go. It started quietly. A few strange things happened around the neighborhood. Maintenance crews showed up one morning, claiming to have been hired by the HOA to inspect shoreline safety. None of us had approved that. Then the next day, a tow truck appeared at the Miller's house, attempting to repossess their camper over an outstanding violation. When Jim confronted the driver, he showed him a signed order bearing the old HOA letterhead. At the bottom, in neat cursive, was K. Simmons. She was back, but she was playing dirty. I called Martha, the investigator. Didn't she lose her authority? I asked. She did. Martha said, frustration clear in her voice. But she still has access to old digital records, and apparently she's using fake credentials. We're already filing a cease and desist, but these things take time. Time we might not have, I muttered, because that night I found the real bombshell. Someone had posted online, on the Cedar Creek Community Facebook page, a long post from a concerned resident claiming that Turner Lake was contaminated with runoff unfit for swimming and under state review. Attached were falsified lab results and a blurry image of barrels floating by my dock. It was laughable, but it spread fast. Neighbors started calling, asking if the lake was really unsafe. I knew Karen was behind it. The tone, the fake professionalism, even the passive-aggressive phrasing screamed her. Buddy barked at my side as I sat down at my desk, staring at the screen. I'd had enough. It was time for Karen to learn that she wasn't the only one who could make calls. The next morning, I contacted Ben Whitaker, my lawyer. Ben, I said, I'm done playing defense. It's time to hit back. He chuckled. That's what I like to hear. What did she do now? I explained everything, the fake orders, the false contamination report, the social media lies. He listened carefully. All right, he said finally. You've got defamation, impersonation of authority, and possibly cyber fraud. You've got evidence. Plenty. Good. I'll make some calls to my contacts in the DA's office. Let's make sure her last act really is her last. 2 days later, Martha returned, this time with 2 county deputies and a warrant. I followed as they knocked on Karen's front door. No answer. Check around back, one deputy said. They circled the house, and sure enough, the garage door was half open. Inside, stacks of HOA files, a laptop, and several boxes of old records were scattered everywhere. Martha opened one and sighed. She's been keeping confidential HOA data. Residents, addresses, banking info, even payment records. This violates multiple state codes. Then she found something else, a folder labeled Turner Lake Evidence. Inside were printed screenshots of her fake contamination post, doctored photos, and notes in her handwriting outlining a plan to get Mike Turner cited by environmental control. Martha looked at me, her expression grim but satisfied. This is enough. She's finished. That afternoon, the police found her. She'd been staying at her sister's place in the next county, running her schemes from there. When the officers arrived, she reportedly screamed that it was a setup and that the community will regret turning against her. But by evening, she was booked for falsifying documents and harassment. The news spread through Cedar Creek like wildfire. That evening, as I stood by the lake, neighbors came one by one to shake my hand. "You did it," Jim said, grinning. "The dragon's finally down." "Not just me," I said. "All of us did." Mrs. Sanchez smiled. She thought she could control everyone. Now she's the one being controlled by the law. We all laughed. A week later, the new HOA board hosted a neighborhood meeting, the first peaceful one in years. They officially renamed Turner Lake to Freedom Lake, a symbolic fresh start. A big wooden sign went up near the dock. Freedom Lake, private property, respect and enjoy. It made me smile every time I saw it. Martha and Ben stopped by too. She handed me a sealed envelope. "This is from the Oversight Committee. Official statement." Inside was a letter declaring Karen Simmons permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. She'd also been fined for falsified records and ordered to pay restitution. "Well," I said, "I guess that's one way to make her resign." Ben chuckled. "Don't mess with fishermen, huh?" "Not when they've got lawyers," I said, smirking. That night, as I sat by the lake with Buddy, a cool breeze rolled across the water. The reflection of the moon shimmered like silver glass. I thought about everything that had happened: the shouting, the 911 call, the lies, the endless nonsense. It had taken months, but justice had finally come around. Buddy rested his head on my knee, content. "We did it, boy," I whispered. "No more HOA Karens. No more false calls. Just peace." Somewhere, far down the road, a lone car engine echoed faintly in the distance. Maybe Karen's, maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter. Cedar Creek was free again, and the lake that had started all this trouble was calm, silent, and absolutely beautiful, just the way it was meant to be.